So, hello everybody, and a warm welcome to this launch of the Circular Action Guide. My name is Elin Bergman, and I'm the Circular Impact Officer of the network Cradlenet, and we are one of the hosts of this launch. And I will also be the moderator of this event. Yes, I thought I will start by kind of going through the agenda for this launch. We're going to have Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap Initiative come and do an introduction to why we started this guide and why we're launching it and the background. Then we're going to go through the guide in itself, and that will be done by Jonas Roupé, the chairman of Cradlenet. Then we're going to have some business perspectives. We're going to talk about how to put circularity principles into practice, a perspective from the telecommunications industry. It's by Stephen Moore, GSMA. And then we're going to talk about how you become a circular frontrunner, and that's with Eva Karlsson, who is the CEO of Houdini Sportswear. And then we're going to have a small panel discussion and talk about what's needed to scale up the circular transition. And we also want to invite you sitting in the audience to ask some questions, and you can do that by asking the questions in the Q&A section. Yeah, and with that said, I think we could just start. So I will just hand over to Johan Falk. Welcome.
Thank you, Elin, and it's great to be here. So I'm the CEO and the co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And our mission is to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions, and by bringing together the leading disruptive and transformative companies in the world. And I want to start with why we need the circular shift. And to keep global emissions close to 1.5, we need to halve emissions by 2030 and every decade up to 2050 while protecting and restoring nature. We're obviously not on track, so we must do our utmost to reach the point where we bend the curve. And companies play an absolute instrumental role here, as we know. And one key strategy to achieve this is to accelerate renewable energy and energy efficiency, which was also really outlined in the latest COP29. But that is not sufficient because up to 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions and maybe up to 90% of the biodiversity loss are believed to be tied to material extraction and the use of resources, and therefore we need a complete shift towards circularity. And we do need to do this in parallel to the energy transformation. So why do we need a circular action guide for companies? Well, we need to mainstream the circular economy for companies. And that is required for companies to achieve their climate targets of halving by 2030 and net zero. So focusing on energy is not sufficient. We also believe we need a hands-on guide focusing on simplicity. And also it is about integration of circularity in strategy and transition plans. And our goal here is also to provide clear instructions how to get the running start on key actions. And the starting point is the business playbook, which outlines how companies can build a holistic strategy to align with the 1.5 ambition. On the next slide. So you may be familiar with our 4-pillar framework and the business playbook, which outlines these key actions. And it is about reducing your own emissions, that's the first pillar. Cutting the value chain emissions, that's the second pillar. Scaling climate solution, that's the third pillar. And accelerate climate action in society. And as we can see on the next slide, the playbook outlines the key actions for circularity in the second and the third pillar. Well, to integrate circularity at the heart of your innovation, development, and sourcing, and to set business models, products, and services for your sector that will be compatible with the net zero world, which need to be fully circular. So the Circular Action Guide provides the more precise direction on the how. Now, as you can see on the next slide, we put the spotlight on the corporate value chains as a starting point. And a traditional linear value chain starts with extraction of material from nature, manufacturing of products, product usage, disassembly, and finally, that the material is used to provide energy or put in landfills. And a circular value chain contrasts to a linear value chain by applying the following principles, as you can see on the next slide. So number one, it will minimize the footprint and use of virgin materials, instead using circulated or near zero fossil materials, and also minimize the material use, of course. And number two, it will enable the products to be used more and much, much longer by building the products to be repaired, reused, refurbished, rented, resold, etc. Number three, it will circulate back components and materials to enable new products and services. And number four, it will minimize waste to energy and landfills and return any material safely to nature. And to drive this change, we need to integrate circularity in companies' targets, like the key performance indicators and the transition plans. And we need to take a stepwise approach, practical approach, but move fast to action. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand over to Jonas Roupé to talk about the concrete guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. And go ahead, Jonas.
Thank you, Elin and Johan. Just to get any curious questions on Cradlenet out of the way. So Cradlenet is one of the world's oldest networks for a circular economy. We primarily target and advise companies, and our aim is simply to accelerate the shift to a circular economy. And we are, of course, delighted for this cooperation. So in the guide, we have 6 key actions, and you can already see the first key action we have identified. We haven't numbered them on this graph because you don't have to take them in a particular order, these actions, but we selected a reasonable sequence just because it's reasonable. So secure top level commitment, we believe, is quite important for several reasons. Circular economy provides a principled framework that will simplify and can add coherence to the management of your company as you venture into the future. And for instance, a transition to a circular economy is most likely necessary in order for you to achieve science-based climate targets and reach net zero. It is very likely that it will improve your resilience and decrease risks in your supply chains. And it will help you identify opportunities to strengthen business throughout the journey, which will be in part driven by regulatory pressures, but also other pressures. So it is a top management thing to look at. But there is also likely to occur trade-offs as you go into a circular journey where the top management attention is needed to keep the direction and priorities right. So that was the first key action. The second is to understand your value chain, the present and the future. It's a big topic, really. It's very important to provide direction and also to surface the high-level decisions and trade-offs as you go on, and looking outside in. This step includes many things, but I cannot say everything here, but one of them is to identify and consider which of your products and services will fit into a net zero, circular, and nature positive future, and which will not, and the gap between your current and future business models in a net zero value chain. So it's simply an important guiding direction for you. And the next one is to integrate circularity into your strategy. And our advice on a top level here is not to deal with circularity as a standalone project, but to use the circular principles to shape the direction and strategies of your company And we developed a simple framework to get you started. I think you will in part recognize it on the next slide. Let's see if we can get the next slide. Here we have it. So it's 4 quadrants in 2 dimensions. You have a products and solutions, which you either could be that you want to start with focusing on your existing products, or you may want to introduce new ones. If you have done LCAs and double materiality, as we describe in the guide, you will have an idea of, what it means with the trade-offs. So one dimension is products and solution. The other one is the business model. And simply put, the business model is about, how you do, what you do, who you sell to, and what you offer. And so that is the, in broad terms, the dimensions which the business logic could be changed. So you can have the existing and you can reinvent it. And for illustration, we have a few examples here. They are just examples to provide a view of the differences. The first one is Prevex, and the natural kind of starting point is, of course, where do you stand now? What can you do within the existing business model, and what could you do with your existing offering? And typically, this is about changing materials, the material mix across your products, the life cycle analysis you probably will have done will give you a good view of the trade-offs. And the example we have here is the Prevex. They are a leading manufacturer of water locks. When they did their assessment several years ago, they figured out that the biggest shift they could do was changing metals in their water locks across all their products into plastic. And then they set up other actions as well, going into renewable materials, many other things. But there was nothing that had as big impact in a short period of time just by shifting the metals. And in that case, to fossil plastic was the first step, and then they started with all the other things. So that, I think, is kind of illustrative that perhaps you can do a lot of the things by just, a thing that isn't really that difficult. And the next one next example is you have the existing products, but you do something with the business model. And it's typically, or it could be many things. The example we have here is a really classical one. It's about 10 years old, but it's really classical, about Renault. They took used engines and gearboxes, refurbished them in a take-back scheme, which is circular kind of business models. Got a lot of business benefit from it, but also the footprint, of course, was reduced greatly. We have a lot of other things you could do, other business models you could try on with existing products. And I know Eva in Houdini, she will have very interesting things to say about what you could do and how far you could take it. So that was that one. We have another example on this on the next slide, which is of Scania and their project Jonas, or venture Jonas, where they basically offer everything as a service that has to do with the trucks that they manufacture, including a meeting place for those that do the transport and those that are customers to the transport, to reduce the number of empty or half-empty lorries on the roads. So it's really going rather far in this and saving a lot of resources, which also means better business in that case. And the next one is new products, but you are within the same, in quotes, old business logic. And the example we have here is paper shell that have a material that is bio-based, and they sell it, like any material manufactured in the old, type of networks. They have a material that, in this quadrant reduces the carbon footprint of the material compared to the old one with 98% or more than 90% typically across a very wide range of products, including circuit boards, as you can see, surfboards and many other things. And the next step they will look into is the closed loops, which brings us to the next example. And here we have Ecovative as an example. Many times, or sometimes, perhaps I should say, it's very different from case to case. But it could be that going fully circular is the best way to unleash the potential of the solution or the product. And it could be very tiresome to do it stepwise in an existing business. And Ecovative, they do a wide range of things from vegan leather, vegan bacon, foam, insulation, even chairs, all grown from mycelium mushrooms. So we grow it so they've centered the entire company, they're offering the value chain around their product. So serves as an example that sometimes you need to go fully on to unleash the potential. And we have for this step an appendix of various business models that could really revolutionize the industry. So that was integrating circularity in your strategy. And the next slide should tell us about the next one, which is about setting and implementing KPIs and plans, transition plans and business plans. And we continued with this linear value chain, many guides and action. Many of the things written about circular economy typically have a value circle of some sort, but usually you would start with a value chain, and that is how the industry looks like. So we started there, as you can see on the next slide. So we put out a rather wide number of KPIs that is a reasonable starting point for you. Also the type of function involved in the different parts of the value chain here. And as you can see, you can have already from the disassembly, it's a decision who should be in the lead and who should be in support. Should it be marketing and sales that are in charge of material recycling and reuse, or should it be strategy, for instance? And on the next, you have more examples of KPIs, and on the next even more, and on the next even more examples. So there is trade-offs to do. There's of course decisions, what will be the leading indicator that would help you in the strategy that you've selected, and who should be in the driver's seat and who should be supportive and who should be informed in it. And we have provided ways to think about it simply. So that would be implementing KPIs and plans. And on the next, we have engaged your value chain. As you could see, it's really important to see the potential and to handle the trade-offs and accelerate. So that's the next, communicating with the value chain. And that brings us to communicate and influence. We have several things that we say there, but one of the things is to engage with NGOs, the industry, the trade organizations, and politicians to advocate and showcase this is the best practice, this is the way forward, perhaps for this industry, and get regulatory support. Which brings us to the last one, which is iterate. So it's a continuous learning, doing a circular transition. Ultimately, it's nature that we mimic. And you have systemic, really interesting lessons as you do it. And one of the things in this category of key actions we have, it's not all, but one of the things is on the next slide, which will be the end of my slides, which is celebrate achievements and then set up for even more ambitious goals. So with that, I thank you for your kind attention and leave it over to Elin and Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Yes, so now it's time for the business perspective. And we have Stephen Moore, who's head of climate action at GSMA, who will first present for us. And then we have Eva Karlsson, who's the CEO for Houdini Sportswear. But first, Stephen, welcome.
Thanks very much, Elin. Great to hear an overview of the guide. I think it's going to be really useful. So I wanted to give a bit of an introduction and an overview of how we've been working on circularity in the telecommunications sector. And one of the first things that we did was we wanted to understand what are the impacts of mobile devices. So we wanted to build the evidence base to understand what the environmental impacts of mobile devices are, and actually also network equipment. So we wanted to look at the supply chain, and from looking at it and analyzing it, determine which were the biggest areas of focus. And in terms of telecommunication supply chains, the two biggest areas are network equipment and mobile devices. And perhaps just looking at mobile devices here, because they're a little bit more familiar to most of us. And you can see that mobile phones contain a lot of rare and valuable critical minerals. So this includes gold, silver, rare earth elements, and cobalt. And you can see alongside those, we've also got other elements like aluminium, nickel, zinc, tantalum, etc. Because mobile phones are complicated devices and they contain lots of different parts. So by doing this initial analysis, this gave us an understanding of how important it is to extend the lifetime of mobile phones as much as possible, and also ensure that at the end of their life, they never end up in landfill or incinerated. That all of these really valuable, both rare and other materials are brought back through a circular loop back into the system. So that was kind of the first stage of our process to try and build the evidence base for a circular economy. And then the next step, which we also included in the strategy paper, was setting a vision for how we can move towards a more circular economy of devices. And I think some of the things that we've got listed here are quite familiar from the previous presentation. So, we set a long-term vision for the industry, which is out to 2050. And the high-level vision for this is that mobile devices will last as long a lifetime as possible. They'll be made with 100% recyclable and recycled content. They will be made using 100% renewable energy, and no device will end up as waste. And really, we looked, you might say, okay, well, this seems an extremely ambitious and stretching target. And, perhaps is it really possible? But really, we were looking at some of the actions and progress that's already been made across the industry. And I'll touch on some of it in a bit more detail a bit later. But this, by no means, we believe, is impossible. Certainly, we just need the will, and we also need a certain amount of innovation in order to get there. The two overarching concepts that we put for this, for device circularity, as you can see here, one is maximizing longevity of devices, and the other one is zero waste. And the reason to keep devices in use for as long as possible is actually, when you look at the carbon footprint of a mobile device, 80% of the footprint has already happened before you take your new mobile phone out of the box. So only 20% is used in the use phase of the phone. So that really struck us and made us realize how important it is that we use these devices for as long as possible. And you can see at the bottom there, we started to sketch out collaboration and system transformation across the value chain. So this is from the perspective of a mobile network operator that kind of sits in the middle of the value chain. Collaborating with our suppliers is really important, engaging with customers, and I'll touch on that as well, and then also partnering with repairers and recyclers. So this was the second stage around setting a vision for a circular economy of devices. We move on to the next slide. There was mention just now on agreeing key performance indicators and metrics, and that's something we certainly brought on board as well. So with a group of operators, we have agreed new 2030 circularity targets, and we are really focused on what is in the most direct control of mobile network operators to begin with. So one is around increasing the take back of mobile phones to more than 20%. This might seem somewhat low, but actually for mobile network operators, when somebody buys a phone, very often the phone will potentially be sold on. Some of them are used to the end of their lives. Some of them might be passed to friends and family, etc. So actually collecting back 1 in 5 mobile phones for a network operator is quite a challenge. And the current take back rates are in single figures. The second one is around no recovered mobile being sent to landfill and incineration. So this is just really making sure that we're keeping those phones, materials, components within this circular economy. And you can see there at the bottom the operators that have committed so far. So we have 16 operators committed, all from different countries all around the world and from all different regions as well, which is fantastic to see. So it shows that this is not just a European focus, but we're seeing interest and action all around the world. Another thing perhaps to highlight just on the right-hand side, because we carried out some research around the time of launching these targets last year, and that was really striking because we found that there are a far number of mobile phones that are sitting and just not being used and could be brought back in either to be put to use or the components and materials to be recycled. What we found is there's really critical minerals in them, 3 million ounces of gold, which is enough to make 200 million wedding rings, which is quite striking, and 50,000 tons of cobalt, which I was particularly struck by, which is enough for 10 million electric vehicle batteries. So if we were to collect back in all of these 5 billion phones, we could make batteries for 10 million electric vehicles. And you can see there at the bottom that refurbishing a phone on average is 80% less carbon dioxide than actually buying a new phone. So this was the next stage of green circularity targets. And then the stage that we're at the moment is around engaging stakeholders across the whole value chain. So we see all of these key stakeholders as having a role in reducing emissions from the value chain and helping to enable us to move to a more circular model. Both upstream, which is device manufacturers, network equipment suppliers, also component manufacturers. So we found that actually the production of microchips, for example, is quite a significant part of the carbon footprint of a mobile phone. And then you've got material extractors and refiners as well. As I say, mobile network operators sit in the middle and they have a role to play both in engaging upstream with the supply chain and also downstream. Customers being one of the major stakeholder groups to speak to. We know that there are some particular challenges around encouraging take back. Not just the customers seeing value in doing it, also explaining the benefits both environmentally but also to the customers of bringing their phones back. Also, there are some issues around trust and privacy. What about data, photos, etc., that are held on phones? How can those be dealt with? How can those be transferred off, etc.? So all of these create barriers that stop the take back that mobile network operators are looking to try and remove or make as low as possible to encourage this flow back. And then, as you've seen, there are a great number of repairers and recyclers that have sprung up over recent years. And this is because we are seeing people want to hold on to their phones for longer. We are seeing more repair happening, broken screens, replacement of batteries, etc., which is great. And then at the bottom, I've just listed some other key stakeholders who we work with. So governments, which might set national legislation on this issue, municipal authorities as well, who might be in charge of waste collection programs and might be those that we partner with, and then also regulators as well, so they're aware of the initiatives that we're undertaking. Great, and then I think this is just a final slide I wanted to cover, and that was to give you a case study of a really fantastic company that's taking this on board and really running with it. So Apple's use of recycled material and renewable energy, which is to reduce their manufacturing impacts. They've got some 2025 goals on the use of recycled materials. So they're currently about 20% recycled content as an average across all of their products. They're looking to move to 100% recycled rare earth elements by 2025, 100% recycled gold plating in the circuit boards, and 100% recycled tin soldering. And then also eliminating plastic from packaging, which I think they've almost achieved. And then very much linked to that, they're looking to be carbon neutral across their entire supply chain and life cycle of every product by 2030. And they've made really big strides on this around engaging their manufacturing supply chain. 300 suppliers are now committed to switching to 100% renewable energy by 2030. And that is covering 90% of their manufacturing spend. So pretty much almost the entirety of their manufacturing supply chain. And they're currently using a huge amount of renewables. So 13.7 gigawatts is a substantial amount of renewable electricity. Great. So hopefully that was useful just to see how the telecommunications industry are putting the circularity principles into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, actually. Really great presentation. What's the focus next for improving the circularity of mobile devices, you think?
Yeah, I think the focus next will be much deeper engagement with manufacturers. So we've seen what Apple is doing, and they're really kind of blazing a trail ahead. So we're having conversations with other manufacturers to understand how they're defining the circular economy. Do they have a circularity strategy? Have they set science-based targets? Are they in line with 1.5 degrees? Do they have a net zero ambition? And then some of these other topics around switching to renewable energy, bringing recycled content into their products, and also really seeing if there are ways that we can collaborate and work together, because specifically around take back, we see, because of these 5 billion phones that are sitting out there, we definitely see there are ways in which we might collaborate, perhaps raise the issue together with consumers, perhaps change some minds and make it a bit easier, remove some of these barriers that I mentioned around take back. So that we can start to bring these products and materials back in, and then we can use them to make new phones rather than using virgin material.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, you will come back in the panel later, so thank you.
Thanks, Elin.
Great. All right, so now we have another speaker who will talk about how to become a circular frontrunner, and welcome Eva Karlsson, CEO at Houdini Sportswear.
Thank you. Great session and great initiative from your side, Exponential Roadmap and Cradlenet. Yes, I'm working at the outdoor company based here in Sweden, but having both value chain upstreams and downstreams across the globe. We're an apparel brand in the outdoor industry, meaning that we have technical products, an apparel layering system from base layers and outer shell layers. So advanced technologies throughout. But when we started looking into this, we can take the next slide, 2001, and realizing that apparel is a dirty business, and dreaming of creating an alternative where we can have these wonderful outdoor experiences, but doing that without any negative impact, maybe even going beyond negative impact towards positive and regenerative. And the most intuitive and common sense solution back then was moving towards circularity. Next slide. So designing for circularity for us, when we defined it, is that we want to create a circular flow of natural resources where nothing goes to waste. We want to create circular flows of products, extending product lifetime to the fullest, and then creating opportunities for access as an alternative to ownership, repairs, recycling, and everything in between. And the last part of circularity, the way we see it, is also sharing insights and knowledge and being open source. So those are the three parameters of designing for circularity that we have been working on since. And we can go to the next slide. So we're part of an industry that's a $3 billion take, make, waste industry. It's clear that both in terms of production and consumption, it's linear, wasteful, and not much value for the many, at least. One example, 100 billion garments are produced every year, and 60% of those are discarded within the first year in the linear system. Less than 1% of the materials are recycled in a proper way. Next slide. At the end of the day, we have been contributing to the destabilized Earth system as an industry. And of course, we cannot accept that, and we cannot continue with business as usual. So then, zooming out a bit, of course, it's still including circularity and the way we work, but I wanted to zoom out in terms of how we look upon impact in general. We can take the next slide, and it's a simple formula. We look at product times volumes plus lifestyle in our case, because we're a lifestyle brand. That is how we can address impact, and that's our responsibility then, not only to look at product design and product production, but also take responsibility on how to shift volumes reducing volumes radically is the opportunity in our industry. And then, of course, addressing also lifestyle, because that's where we see actually the most hopeful opportunity to shift within this decade, where a mind shift towards more aware consumption in apparel is something that doesn't take infrastructure, it doesn't take anything but a shift in mindset, and that's where we place our hope, even though we work on all of these parameters, of course. So a couple of examples, we can take the next couple of slides and I can share just these are the design principles that we work on. It's about this holistic perspective on product, then, not only how it's designed for circular flows of raw materials, but also how it's designed, we call it less is more, so that we have a product that works for many different things and is repairable and lasts longer, built to last in terms of quality, but not only quality, style as well, so that you have products that people want to keep. They fall in love and stay in love with the product rather than wanting to switch it for a new one. And when it comes to comfort, what we can see and what we've seen during these 2 decades is that there's a clear indication among our customers, at least, that comfort includes a lot of these issues that weren't addressed before. Sustainability, circularity, mindful consumption, all of this is relevant for early adopters. And I would say you would become a stranded asset if you didn't look at comfort from a more holistic standpoint looking forward. Next slide. I think it's maybe one of the slides that we have had most photographs taken of. It's a very simple one-page tool that is very useful during the design process to question conventions and make sure that we put products on the markets that have a relevance there, that they age with beauty, that they have a circular next life solution, as we call it. But it's easy to make it very, very complex, and circularity for sure is complex as well. But these simple tools for daily operations, I would really suggest that you bring those into the operational teams, and they've been very helpful to us. Circular monomaterial designs is, of course, one way of working towards circularity. And the cool thing here is that I think we can address, if you look back at the planetary boundaries framework, we address every boundary in the positive way by moving towards circular monomaterial designs. Clean chemistry, we find it important as part of circularity because we don't want to circulate poisonous chemicals, of course, but we're only addressing one of the boundaries here, while extending product lifetime and making sure products last for a long time, of course, is helpful both from climate perspective, biodiversity, land system, ocean systems, and everything else. We can take the next slide. Just a couple of, I think you see also we have indications on which of the pillars, according to the exponential roadmap pillars that we are working on, which is, of course, these 3 that are most important to us. But the first pillar, which is our own operations, is a given. Of course, that's the one that should be easiest for everyone to switch into circular and sustainable. Houdini Circle, it's a way for us to build a digital ecosystem where we enable access and extend product lifetime. There's a lot of work on communications. Live large with less is an example of a campaign to inspire and enable people to have a smaller wardrobe that makes more sense. And open source, as I mentioned earlier on, circular knowledge flows is an important part, and that includes, of course, advocacy as well. Next slide, please. Thanks for supporting me on the switching of slides. Just a few reflections. Yeah, I mentioned the 4 pillars, which is helpful, and then moving towards what Jonas talked about. The linear, traditional way of looking at it, and exploring every step of the way how we can move towards circular. And I would also add that what we've found is that the greatest opportunity is where you look into not only the technological but human aspects, and how mimicking nature and natural flows and understanding how that also taps into humanity and what becomes relevant and attractive for customers and users. That is where we do the most business innovation and find the best business opportunities within the circular transition. I think we can move to the next slide. I just wanted to, I tested this one, the model, and put in some KPIs, and I think it really makes, this is a helpful tool, not only for KPIs that are metric-based, but also as a checklist for making sure that the work is ongoing and holistic enough. And with that said, I think it's one last slide. And I would really encourage, this has been the adventure of our lifetime at the company to move from linear to circular. It's really about reimagining everything. There are design flaws that are sometimes easy to fix and make total sense. And you just haven't looked upon them before because it's conventional to do it linear and wasteful. But there's such opportunities in reimagining everything and finding these transitional points. Sometimes they are easy to fix, sometimes they're more difficult. And I would also urge you to, we shifted the name of our long-term roadmap to a trail map, because we are part of a larger system where there are hurdles and systems that are making it really difficult to move from linear to circular. But like nature, you can always find a way, and maybe it's not like you have to maybe move to point 3 before you can do point 1, but don't stop at point 1 and wait until you can manage to change it, but rather find another way of moving ahead in your circular transition and then move back towards that one that was tricky. I think the system is changing, but of course that's happening in a slow manner. And we can support that change or shift, but also move faster by focusing elsewhere for a while. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva. Fantastic as always. Can you just tell us very shortly, how has this strategy been received since you launched it?
Well, I think that when we launched it in 2001, we were a small company back then, and it was not attractive, but we were very relentless in our dialogue with our partners in every direction, stakeholders in general. So we got our most important partners on board, and they are extremely grateful for that today, because now, of course, it's an entirely different context where it's there's demand from customers and users, there's expectations, I guess, as well, and then there's legal at least the processes going on that makes it really relevant for many reasons to move from linear to circular. So it's much easier today, and it's amazingly inspiring, like I said, an adventure, and like Jonas said, it's iterating along the way, and a journey full of knowledge and collaboration. Wonderful.
Great. And we really need front runners, and you truly are a front runner. So it's great to hear your story. All right, thank you so much, Eva. And you can stay, because we're going to have a panel discussion now, and we're going to talk about what's needed to scale up the circular transition. And I want to welcome back Jonas and Johan and Steven. And I will stop sharing so we can see everybody. And I think we also got some questions coming in from the audience as well. But I'm going to start with some questions we already prepared. So how far have we come in the circular transition, do you think? According to you, who want to answer this one? Jonas.
I can kickstart it. So the world economy is today about 7% circular, and we're slipping in the wrong direction. When the measurement started 2018, 2017, we were at 9%. At 9%, we're about half to the target. If we reach 20%, we would be able to reach the Paris Agreement. But now we are at the third of what we need to reach. And of course, the longer we slip, the more the more circular we have to be in balance with nature.
Good, thank you. Anybody else? Do you want to comment on this as well?
Maybe I could add, Elin, that it's easy to think that there's innovation to be done before you can start. But in the apparel industry, we're at 88% circular product by design. And that is possible with current technology. It has been possible for 10 or so years. So I think it's really important for everyone to realize there are massive opportunities. So it's more about starting and moving ahead rather than thinking that you have to have all the answers and know all the technologies that are going to be needed in the future. Move ahead. And another reason for waiting is sometimes data, I find. And we don't have to count and know everything by the decimal. There's a lot of common sense in circularity. So I would urge everybody to start.
Good.
And then add data along the way.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about obstacles and opportunities in the coming questions here. Does anybody else want to comment on how far we come in the transition, or should we move to the next question? I'll move to the next question. What's needed to scale up the circular transition, do you think? Is this the guide? It will not solve all the problems, or do we need anything else? And what can that be? Johan, do you want to talk about this?
I think the guide, but also the collaboration that both of you are an example of, Exponential Roadmap and Cradlenet. Collaboration to move from a 100% competitive way of looking at it, but rather finding ways to evolve together.
Great.
I do think if we can create this positive momentum with the leaders in the front line working together, but also sharing all the knowledge to the rest of the companies, as you said. So like a positive, what we talk about, the race to the top, a positive race to the top. I think a good sign is, of course, that with all, the net zero targets, we have a big part of the economy now with net zero targets and halving targets. I don't think most companies has realized that in order to address these targets, we have to move towards circularity and not only focus on renewable energy. So I think we have an incredible opportunity to actually to achieve a big momentum now in terms of circularity.
And maybe I can add to that, because I'm also working a lot with circular economy, but now the new EU legislation with the EU taxonomy and the CSRD reporting directive is making everybody move extremely fast. So legislation and political leadership is extremely important too. What's happening in the European Union now is actually changing what's happening on the planet. So I think it's extremely strong, and it shows that political leadership is extremely important. Do you agree? Yeah, Jonas.
I could add, I so much agree. What the European Union does is great in so many ways. They improve the business conditions. They direct financing, like we get better sales to our vessels, more power to it. And they also provide a lot of tools for navigation, you could say, on these seas. So I think it's a big mistake to look at what the European Union does as something that you need to do minimum compliance to. It's really, really helpful. And I think to add on it, upgrading the rules, such like ecocide law, is important, so that we have a safety bar. And then the third thing I just wanted to add is that the voice from the front runners is so important, so that the voice from the status quo isn't the only voice that politicians hear, because they will never be brave, the politicians, unless they hear the other voice.
Good. Okay, so next question is, what are the obstacles we're facing for the transition? You kind of talked about that a bit, Eva, already, but do we have other obstacles? Do you want to share? Maybe Stephen, you have some from your sector?
Yeah, we've definitely found quite a few different obstacles, both across the mobile phone side and network equipment as well. They're quite different actually. I mentioned that the manufacturing of mobile phones is where the majority of the emissions lie. It's actually the opposite for network equipment. Some more emissions lie in the actual use phase. So I think it's also thinking about that and looking at the life cycle of products and thinking about what are the biggest areas. I think we touched upon this area earlier that we should address, whether there are quick wins around those. Maybe just a perspective as well. I mean, it's also making sure that an opportunity like the what's happening across Europe with the Eco Design Directive doesn't become an obstacle, because you then have a two-speed world where you have products that are created for the European market at a certain level, and then you have products created outside that are not. So I think this is also where collaboration is really helpful, and also associations and international organizations can help take what's being done in Europe and encourage those across the value chain to apply similar principles, not only in Europe, but also outside. So I certainly see this as the GSMA has something of a role to play in this, because we're a global industry association. So we're engaging with operators both inside Europe, but also outside, and also a manufacturing chain that's quite common. So I think that's worth flagging as well.
Good. And I think we need to communicate the obstacles more so we can remove them, right? Any other obstacles you want to share that we can discuss? No, everybody's happy. We want to talk about the opportunities more, right? So what are the opportunities that we've seen for the transition? Does anybody want to share? I know a lot of them, of course, but Eva, from your point of view, you already mentioned some.
Yeah, I think one opportunity that I believe is maybe not the first you would think about, but moving from a transactional to a relational way of working, whether it's towards a upstream or downstream stakeholder, that relational business model makes total sense for so many reasons. And with circularity, you move in that direction, and it's truly, it's very different, and of course valuable in a world where trust is going to be more and more important for brands and companies.
Yeah. And Stephen, you already talked about all the gold and the fantastic materials that we have to run, or was it 5 million EV cars, or I can't even remember the number, but it was an enormous amount. Okay. What else, or what other opportunities do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just is a huge opportunity that can't be overstated, really. Just the amount of valuable stuff that is probably sitting with all of us. It's probably, you know, I think we're all guilty, if you like, if that's the right word, of having some devices that are sitting around our houses. Perhaps we don't know exactly what to do with them, but we're seeing some great initiatives across Europe and elsewhere to either encourage people to bring these out, and so they're kind of safely recycled or reused, but also seeing lots of fantastic repair initiatives happening, particularly not just with phones, but across the whole kind of ICT sector, with a lot of these things that maybe, you know, something small has gone wrong with them, but it's actually a relatively straightforward fix. It's just kind of finding a person, somebody who's experienced and capable enough to do that, or also passing it on to somebody who perhaps would like to keep the lifetime of your device going, even if you don't want to. So I've been really heartened by the sort of groundswell and grassroots movement from this. We've been talking a lot about top-down legislation, but I really think there's kind of a big bottom-up push as well on this to enable much more kind of often it's kind of peer-to-peer, so it's people kind of interacting directly, or perhaps in smaller groups, and with quite localized groups as well, which is really good to see.
And we have 3 members in Cradlenet, the network me and Jonas run. We have Foxway, we have Inrego, we have 3Step IT, all working with circular IT. So I think more and more companies are popping up, and now the old things in your drawers actually have a value. So it's good to just not keep them there. Good. Okay, so next question is, how can we create a race to the top? I mean, Eva, you and Houdini are already enormous, fantastic front runners, which is amazing. But how can we get more to want to be the front runners? Do you have any tips? Or maybe Johan, you want to share something? You have experience.
Please, Johan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as we talked about, that is what we're trying to achieve. So our sort of theory of change is that if we can work in the front line with the absolute leaders like Houdini and other companies, doesn't necessarily have to be the large companies, but we have some large good companies as well, as Stephen mentioned, and really highlight these examples, both that it's attractive, but it's also important to show that it's attractive business over time. Of course, that it's possible to build this business in a solid way and scale it up, because I think that is a way to show how attractive it is, and then work with other initiatives to openly share both the ideas and the best practices for anyone actually to copy, so we can get the race to the top. But also maybe some fear of missing out is also very powerful, as I see it. I also think what you talk about in terms of lifestyles is incredibly important, because we lost this sort of the value of things, and that we actually appreciate things, moving to this absolutely wasteful society. So also we have other industries which has a role here, like the advertising industry and the responsibility they have. And there is a lot of initiatives there to actually help us to appreciate things and start to think and do things in another way.
Great. I think we can let some questions in from the audience now. We have a question from Caroline. Do you also have discussions with policymakers? And if so, what is their view at the moment? Who is pushing this forward? Maybe this is a question for both Exponential Roadmap and Cradlenet. I don't know if you want to answer for Cradlenet, Jonas, or do you want me to answer for us?
No, I think I'll give it to you to answer that one.
Yeah, so I mean, Cradlenet, we're doing three things. Of course, we have the business network, we have knowledge sharing, and then we try to push policy, because that's where a lot of obstacles are. So what we do is we write debate articles, we do events where we invite the politicians, we send out forms for them to fill in, we rank their ambitions, and we do a lot of things, also take meetings with them, of course, to inform them of how they should act. So this is what we do. Maybe you want to share what you do at Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Johan.
Well, the fourth pillar is really about influencing society. And we have one key part now together with our organizations that, for example, we need to work with the big trade organizations to ensure that they align with the 1.5 ambition and go in the front line, instead of actually, in the worst case, block climate action. And we have some of the leading companies inside these bigger organizations that they really need to make their voice heard as front runners. So we will work on that and put really tough requirements on the trade organizations as well. So that is one piece we can contribute with.
Good. All right, I think we only have time for one more question, and that's how can we best engage the value chain stakeholders, you think? Anybody want to share that with us? Maybe it's the guide who will actually do it. If we send the guide out to everybody, then everybody will know what to do. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a useful step. So I think we need to build knowledge about this. We need to make clear what these challenges are, but also what the solutions are, and the fact that, I think to Ava's point, that a lot of the technologies and innovation to solve this already exists. So that shouldn't be a barrier. We're also thinking about what the business case is for circularity and trying to articulate that more clearly. I think that's really important, because there is a very good business case for circularity, but it's sometimes perhaps presented piecemeal. So you only see elements of it, and you might see more the non-financial benefits rather than those, or you might just see the risks, etc. So we're definitely thinking about that and how we can develop that up this year to communicate it in a clearer way. I think there's also just a lot of benefit in discussion. So both we're thinking about more individual discussions with specific suppliers and manufacturers, but also having discussions as a group as well. You have slightly different conversations, obviously, in a group than individually. So exploring both of those and having a kind of open space to have open conversations, perhaps Chatham House rules, where we can perhaps be a little bit more open about some of the challenges, particularly where there might be parts of an organization that are pro change, there might be other parts of the organization that are more pro the status quo, and discuss how to make change happen within an organization as well as kind of externally from outside as well. So there are just some initial reflections. Yeah.
Okay, so really want to end this on the dot, and now it's 5 o'clock. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, but also go back to sharing the screen, and kind of to wrap up this, say the next steps. We have some call to actions here. And it's an invitation to help, to get help from you to scale up and spread the guide to as many as possible. We also, of course, want you to implement the guide and follow the steps in the guide. And we also want to get some feedback from you guys who reads the guide and try to use it. Can we make it better somehow? We're going to make new versions of it so it's perfect in the end. But we also want to do more guides for different sectors, more circular economy guides. So this is invitation for you, but we also want to say thank you so much for listening. Thank you everybody who's joined, and we want to engage with you. So please email us at the email address or contact us. We have already sent out some links and so on for where you can find us. But thanks to everybody listening, and thanks so much for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.